Well, welcome to the God is Better Than You Think podcast. My name is Josh, and I am a pastor and former journalist who reported on abuse in evangelical institutions for the Washington Post. I was recently in the Amazon documentary Shiny Happy People, and I'm here with my friend Taylor Bluebaugh, a foster mom who is passionate about social justice and inclusion and how we practically live those things out in local church communities.
Yeah, and each week we have a conversation with people who take following Jesus seriously, but in doing that, they found themselves heading in surprising or hopeful or unexpected places. And the more we hear these stories, the more we realize that our faith is farther reaching and more beautiful and more inclusive than maybe we realized. And maybe God really is better than we think.
Which is the name of the podcast.
That's the name.
And so my question for you, Taylor Bluebaugh, is this. Why was being a part of this podcast something that you were interested in doing?
I mean, I think there's lots of reasons. First is that I love podcasts. Podcasts have been a big part of kind of shifting my faith to be something that I really believe in and own as my own journey. And I think a big part of that is because I love the variety of voices that are in podcasts and the diversity of thought that comes from that. When you are listening to maybe sermons or like reading books, it's kind of a one human, one voice, one perspective. And as I journeyed into what was next for using my voice and my passions in the way that maybe God was calling me, it didn't feel like it was that. It didn't feel like it was the like one voice thing. And I don't know, I shouldn't say that it's not, but don't. Josh is smiling. If you can't see him, if you're just listening, Josh is smiling, and there's a reason, and we're not going to talk about it right now. But I think what I feel really great about is that podcasts are not that. And what podcasts give me the opportunity to do is just introduce people to other voices that can continue to just pour into what their faith is.
And part of that, I think, maybe is your personal wiring. But then I think there's also a part of it that's like, as you have kind of gone on this journey of asking harder questions of the faith tradition that you were given, that maybe there's even a little bit of a skepticism about this idea of like the monolithic communicator who, whether they mean to or not, and a lot of times they do, and sometimes maybe it's just the medium itself, but there's almost sort of like an unquestioned authority that comes, well, I'm the person who's giving the sermon, or I'm the person who wrote the book, whereas maybe podcasts for you feel a little bit more...
Yeah, I'm not like handed. I mean, I'm not saying there's not influence that I've like experienced with people. Like I've listened to their podcasts. Like, yes, they're obviously influential. I respect what they say, but there's something about like as they're speaking, maybe their thoughts are being challenged, or there's not that sense of authority. And I'm much more comfortable lending my voice to a space where I can say, I'm not the authority. I don't know. I have questions, and I love what other people bring to that conversation. And so being able to interview people, being able to talk about other people's works and lives and journeys, it feels like a more true to myself version of exploring faith.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And you asked me to be on this podcast, and I don't remember what take of this. You've already said what things.
I couldn't either.
We've said this too many times. We've tried. It's technology. So you had this podcast previously without me. Prior to asking me to do this with you, you did it on your own without me. To be fair, you didn't know me, so that's fine. That's acceptable. It was 4 years ago, and I'm okay.
That was an audio medium, and you're like sitting there sort of very dramatically playing with your hair when you said that.
I do hair flips when I'm feeling petty. I just need to start like saying hair flip. I just need to put that as like
I think that would really communicate it, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. Hair flip. He didn't ask me to do the podcast with him the first time because he did not know me, so that's fun. But you had a podcast, and you started it for a reason.
It did.
Which was?
Yeah, so I don't remember everything about the reason that I started it. I do remember that it was during the pandemic, and it was shortly after George Floyd had been murdered. And I was in this very conservative, very predominantly white area where the conversation felt like it's like you're either a Christian and a conservative and you're kind of one of us, or you're one of those other people. And the other people were liberal, woke, Antifa, Marxist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like not Christian and not one of them, I guess. And there's this part of me that wanted to really break down that dichotomy. And so at that time, there's a guy named Jemar Tisby.
Whoop-whoop. Shout out Jemar Tisby.
Yes, he is like has gone on to kind of become a big deal. But back then he was just starting to become a big deal. He's just written this book called The Color of Compromise. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey man, I kind of just want to have a conversation with someone that I think could provide maybe a little bit of a better conversation about some of this stuff, where someone can hear someone who's a follower of Jesus and who feels that sincerely, also talking about the history of racism in the church, and who can articulate an understanding of systemic racism in a way that might break down people's predispositions or prejudices about the kind of people who feel this way about stuff.
You did pick the perfect human for that. He
Yeah.
is incredibly intelligent, so smart, so well versed in the history and all of that stuff. But to have that perspective shift some of that, Jesus can only be followed one way, and this is what it looks like in these systems. Yeah.
And he should have. I don't know why he said yes to some random guy, but he
maybe,
did.
Maybe he'll say yes again.
Maybe.
I would like to talk to him.
That was a hair flip, but it wasn't. But it wasn't a petty.
It wasn't petty.
No.
Maybe my hair flips have multiple meanings.
I think they do.
Let's explore that on this podcast.
So this is a podcast about Taylor's hair flips. Anyway, what
Hair
that
flip.
led me to realize is that I could just randomly cold call or DM, slide into people's DMs.
Don't do
No,
that. Not the same.
It didn't mean that back then. And this was the pandemic. It was a different time. And
Sure.
that I could just reach out to people who I thought had interesting perspectives on God or faith or what this whole Christianity thing looks like and means, and just ask them to be on this podcast. Because then if you do that twice, one time it's just a random conversation with a dude, but if you do it twice, now it's a podcast. So I was like, would you be on my podcast? And it has a name, and look, here it is. And then people would say yes. And so I got to interview a bunch of really interesting people. You can actually see them in the feed that we'll have, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably they'll be there.
Let's keep those.
Sure. And
but the name was God. That name that you had is the same name.
Yeah,
God is better than you think.
yeah, and I think the idea that was that I wanted to keep breaking down sort of the stereotype of well, if you're a Christian, to be a Christian is to be a white, conservative, evangelical who lives in the suburbs and sing all the same songs, and they probably have an American flag on on their pulpit. That's not quite the right word.
Have we discussed how we feel about making barfing noises on the mic?
I don't think people want to hear those. And
so I'll just add that to barf.
We'll add that
to my list of.
We'll add it in post.
Okay.
And so I just wanted to interview people who were able to bring there's a lot more diversity to this whole following Jesus thing than you think. And really my hope in all of that was for people who felt stifled. I think for so many of us, we were given a container, and it was a very small container, and it was this is Christianity. And we started outgrowing it. And for a lot of people, outgrowing it meant leaving completely. And honestly, I get it. There was so much gnarly stuff that so many of us have inherited, and just feeling like you have to walk away to get rid of that makes sense to me. And yet I wanted to show people that container isn't actually Christianity. Christianity, following Jesus, is more like a tent, and it's a really big tent. And we can even disagree passionately about stuff inside that tent and still say, but we all follow Jesus. And so much of this podcast is wanting to present a bigger vision of what following Jesus can look like, that maybe gives people the freedom of saying, it's well, maybe I can keep exploring my faith, even if it takes me in, like we said up front, surprising directions.
Yeah. And I feel like that's been the dynamic of even obviously we didn't know each other 4 years ago, but as we have gotten to know each other, that's kind of been the space that we've been in conversationally, and just as we've explored what does church look like, and what does it look like to be in ministry, and how do we use our voice as well, when we don't want to use them or been told we shouldn't use them, or whatever that is. I think that has been the DNA of our conversations and our friendship. And so
yeah, and so I think in a lot of ways it was because I found a kindred spirit in you, but honestly someone who's not just we agree on all the same things and we high five. And I don't know how much I've actually said this to you until right now on this podcast, but you
don't know what's coming. This feels unpredictable.
Also, that was another hair flip you just did.
No,
that was a I don't know what's about to happen hair
I
flip.
hate all of this.
No, you challenge me that I don't just find a sounding board of someone's going to bounce back the same ideas at me, that you're someone where we both, I think, resonate with a lot of the same things, and yet you are challenging stuff I'm not sure I've really challenged, or you're bringing a perspective to things, or you're listening to voices that I'm not listening to. And that has been really good for me. And so I was like, well, it would really be fun if we did this together.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way. I think that's a mutual challenging that we experience in our conversations. And I hope that as we get to have those conversations, that's what we're doing, that we're bringing people into spaces where we're asking questions, challenging thoughts and ideas, but doing it in a way that says, like, we're humans and we're looking to follow Jesus, and we want to know what's the reach of that? How far can we go and just keep following Jesus?
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And so if that's something that you're hearing and you're like, yeah, that sounds interesting to me, then we hope that you listen to this podcast and check out more. So look through the feed, or if this is the very first thing that you see on the feed, then like more is coming. We'll have podcasts that we're releasing. We'll be releasing them every 2 weeks, starting sometime soon. So look out for that.
And they've got some really great humans on them. So if you're not entertained by the conversation that Josh and I are having here, it's okay. There's more. There's other humans.
We add in other humans.
We add in other humans.
Yeah. Some of them are great. Most of them are great. They're all great. I'm sorry. That's fine.
Yeah.
They're all great.
That's really, Cut that part out. Just edit that. Most of them.
Don't tell me what to do.
I will continue to make requests.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's the podcast, and we hope that you listen.
Bye.
I was recently in the Amazon documentary, Shiny Happy People.
I'm going to stop you. You said Amazon.
Amazon?
Try again.
Well, hey there.